Welcome to the fourth episode of the Nesting Eagles podcast. We are coordinators for the Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance Bald Eagle Nest Watch and citizen scientists. I am Drew, and I'm here with my co-host Beth. How you doing, Beth?
I'm doing pretty good. How about you, Drew?
Good, good. Actually, we had crazy weather the last couple of days. We've been in the 60s here in the Seattle area, so it's like feels like spring, but I think it's going to come crashing down at some point. You know, it's never that easy where you go from
And
winter
we,
conditions to like spring. So, but we'll see. I'm enjoying it right now. It's sunny and like 60, 65, so it's been
that's
crazy
not
weather.
fair. We
Yeah,
have been brutally cold,
yeah.
brutally, but we have a nice day today. But of course, along with 50-degree weather comes 50-mile-per-hour winds.
Yeah.
Yay.
All right. So as you can see up here on the screen, we have what's a incubating eagle, bald eagle in the nest. And this is kind of the time of year where we're getting that. So we want to discuss a little bit about eggs and incubating and all the nicks, the weird stuff they do and how it works. But first, I wanted to talk a little bit about the pre-nesting. So a lot of times what eagles do is before they lay eggs, they get those hormones kick up and they get very territorial. So a lot of cases, what we see is when a nest is really ready to get started and get the breeding season started, you see them get very territorial. They'll clear out other eagles. They'll clear out any other predators or any threats, crows, that kind of thing, out of the area or that around the vicinity of the nest. Just it's kind of like I've used this example before. It's kind of like when like a human example is, when you're getting to that process where it's almost time to have the baby, you might have uncles and aunts and relatives around in the room, but once it's at that process, it's usually the mom and the dad and the doctor and the nurses. So they want it as safe as possible, especially since it kind of takes a lot out of the female to lay those eggs. And then I think we've mentioned this before, but the process of the egg laying at the eagles is, they'll lay one, she'll lay one, she might wait a day or two, she'll lay another one, and then maybe a third, and then in some rare cases a fourth. So there is that process, and they get very territorial right before. So Beth and I have seen this a number of times. We can kind of tell before, okay, this territory is getting ready. They're definitely a little more defensive, and they're not letting other eagles or other potential threats in that area. Another question I get a lot, and Beth probably gets it as well, is they'll see first year eagles out at the nest site before this process. And there's always that question, is this the fledgling from last year? The short answer is we really don't know. It's hard to tell. I'd love to give a better answer, but there's not many birds, there's not many eaglets that are tagged in the nest anymore. So it may be, it may not be. They kind of wander around. Some of them wander around, some of them stick around. So it's hard to say for sure. But once they get to that process of the next breeding season, they will definitely clear out those eagles because they can turn into a threat for the nest. So they definitely don't want them around once they're ready to start the process. So anything to add, Beth, that you like pre-nesting thoughts or anything that you think of?
No, I know you and I had a lot of conversations about whether or not families of eagles will be together. And I was putting together a whole family tree, and you were saying, no, those aren't related there. And it's so hard to detach yourself from that idea that these eagles are somehow related. But the way they wander, and as you pointed out to me before too, a first year eagle at a nest, could be looking for an easy meal
Yeah.
of some food that the adults have in the nest as they're getting ready to go on eggs or something. So they're attracted to nests, it seems, for whatever reason they want to be taken care of, or they're possibly up to no good.
Yeah. And also just, most of the nest territories, I'd say the vast majority of they're in good areas intentionally, especially for eagles, for prey items. A lot of them are close by water or some sort of prey items. For example, like when I was out in Colorado, being a lot drier, you saw territories that were by prairie dog fields or not even very close to water. So, depending on the locale in the country you are at, they're going to be at the nest location is going to be at a spot that's it's easily they can find prey, and of course that's going to attract other eagles because it's a good spot to fish or hunt or whatever. So that's why you're going to see other eagles in that area, typically around nests. But once they get to that point where they are laying eggs, they want those guys out in a way so that they can safely, incubate those eagles or incubate the eggs. Once they get to that process, these guys will be on the nest for pretty much 24/7 for the next about 35 days. And again, with the laying staggered laying, it's going to kind of it should hatch in that same order if the eggs are viable. And I'll have Beth talk a little bit about what that means, what they do. Eggs are viable, and I'll leave it to you, Beth. I know you've done a little more research on some of that topic. I know we've had conversations about that as well.
There's so many things that can go
Yeah,
wrong that,
yeah,
when I initially started doing this, we had 100% of our nests fledging eaglets. And then when things started to go a little bit south, you start looking up all the reasons for them to not be successful. And there's just a myriad, from being klutzy in the nest, to accidentally puncturing or cracking an egg, which of course was what DDT was helping to do to the eggs. But for one reason or another, one of them could be, infertile. You don't know whether there's a fertility issue in the nest. There's diseases that can happen. They can be off the egg for too long of a period of time during a cold winter day, so the egg effectively dies. Drew and I have had conversations where we've read things that say that the male and female can feel movement in the egg. So even when they know there is no more movement in the egg, their instincts are just so focused on raising young that they'll continue to incubate, um, even though they may actually know that the egg is no longer viable. So we had a female at a nest out by me that sat on the nest for, it was almost 2 full months before she left it. And I remember asking our rep from the WDNR, but why? What happened? And, she doesn't know. Nobody knows. And, you're just so frustrated for that bird that, you know, sat there for 2 months and, you know, has nothing to show for it,
yeah.
basically.
It's a tough process for them. And I don't know how much this is based on fact or not, but it seems like the older pairs realize that earlier. When you hear about stories like that, and there's also been I know of a couple nest cams that have had that issue before, where they likely probably had, infertile or not viable eggs, and the eagles just continue to incubate it way past that 35 day range. And I don't think, I think it's just instinct. You hear about that story of the eagle, the in captivity that was because of hormones, most likely was incubating a rock. So you
That
get these
wasn't even
crazy,
egg shape.
yeah, yeah, it wasn't either. So
It was lumpy.
yeah, yeah, but I think they're a lot of times their instincts just take over, and they're like, I gotta stay on this nest, I gotta take care of these eggs. And another thing they'll do, and that really shows us that things are going well, is that they'll periodically stand up, usually about an hour or so, they'll roll those eggs, and you kind of see them sit up a little bit and roll the eggs, and then usually sit back down. And I think, Beth, you call it like squishy time.
Yeah,
I
it's a
kind of
squishy
call it
thing.
like it's kind of like a waddle a little bit, but
Yeah,
they kind of waddle
they
their
squish
back.
down.
Yeah.
They wiggle back and forth to get that brood patch back
Yeah.
in contact with the egg or
Yeah.
eggs.
Yeah, and just to explain what a brood patch is, it's basically a spot that doesn't have any feathers, that because of the hormones, the male and the female gets, and it's just to give it the eggs more contact, with with the warm body of the eagle, and it also helps when the eaglets do hatch to keep them warmer too. So it's, instead of them sitting on, feathers, they're sitting on, skin of the bird, and it keeps them a little bit warmer in that process, because that's really important, especially up in the northern parts of the U.S. I don't think it's as big a deal for our southern bald eagles,
Right.
but up here with it, it usually gets pretty cold during their season. If they stay off that, the eggs too long, or let the temperature drop too much on that, it's going to cause the egg to die and not be viable to hatch. So that's a process that they go through there, and it's the nature of it. We get a lot of questions about, oh, my eagles were off the nest for several hours, and it all depends on the temperature outside. They can stay viable, but typically, if it's more than a few minutes, it's probably not a good thing, especially if it's really cold out. But if it's above freezing, there's a little more leeway as far as how much they can stay off the nest, and the eggs will still be able to hatch.
The last year or 2 years ago, we had the nest in Milwaukee City that actually was on eggs, and we had some bad storms, and one of the neighbors had an arborist come, and they were working on the property for a couple of days. And for some reason, on the third day, I had been there in the morning. I saw them. They were incubating. They were doing great. And then I started getting phone calls saying no one's on the nest, and they're flying around and they're yelling. And I couldn't leave where I was at. And by the time I got there, I'm like, watch how long they're off the nest. And it was like 30 degrees that day, and they'd been off the nest for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
And they seemed to know it was over. They went back to incubate. They just stayed a short time, and they both flew off. And then the next day they were back to incubating. And as you know, I volunteer at a at a raptor center, and so I asked staff, I'm like, I know they know that they're no longer viable, and the response I got was, yeah, but think of those hormones at work there. They're pushed to do this. This is what they
Yeah.
should be doing at this time of year. And, that's a hard thing to get over. They can't just, it's not that easy.
Yeah.
Um, and, I thought that was, really great for helping me to start thinking in terms of, how do you break that behavior that you should be doing at this time of the year? It's hard for an eagle to just walk away and give up on their eggs, even when they know that they're no longer viable.
Yeah, and that's where you get the stories, and you see it a lot at the nest cam, especially up in the areas that get a lot of snow. There's the incubating eagle that's just covered in snow. I mean, that's their will, and that's their instincts. The instincts telling them, I gotta stay on this nest, I gotta protect these eggs, and I gotta keep them warm. So there is that real, I think they get associated with that characteristic, that they're hardy and very devoted, and it's a lot of it's to do with just purely hormones and instincts that are telling them to do that. But I think it is a good personality trait that a lot of people latch onto with eagles, is that they're hardy and can battle through these huge storms. So which is it's a great trait to have, and it's going to help them be more successful because there's a lot that can go wrong during an eagle's nesting season, and they have to persevere and do that sort of stuff to keep going, basically. So
They're very good and attentive parents. I
they
mean, and
are, yeah.
we'll get more into that later podcasts, but they're very impressive to
Yeah,
watch.
they are. Yeah, I think that's why they're so interesting because you think of them as this big bad predator, which they
Which they
are.
are.
But again, they also are very good parents, and it's a very long season. It's one of the longest in the bird world, to be honest. And they don't get it very easy, especially our northern birds, and up in Alaska and those birds. Um, it's rough. It's rough. But we also wanted to talk a little bit about timing. So, I know we had talked on the previous podcast about that kind of Valentine's Day being the start of the egg laying. We're kind of in the middle here. What are we, the 28th. So we have for our area, for the southern Wisconsin area, it's about another couple weeks. And then there's what I call it's kind of arbitrary cutoff, but a lot of people ask me like, and I know Beth, you've asked me that too. Once they get past like March, mid-March, and they're laying eggs, why can't they be successful? Why can't they start that late? And it brings on a lot of different factors and puts stuff in play that is not great and just kind of downgrades their chances. The big one's just the timing. The season's really long, so they have to incubate for that 35 days for it to hatch. So there's no way around that. They can't shorten that and hatch earlier. So it just with the timing and everything and the growth of eagles, it starts to get into 4th of July is a big milestone as well. Most of the nests have fledged by the 4th of July or early July. And then when you start getting into mid-July and into late July, the temperature's higher. There's a lot more biting flies. There's a lot of more stuff going on, and it just decreases the survival, the ability of the eaglet to survive. We've seen it a few times, but the data just of all the seasons, I think we have a few that have fledged, mid-July, but most of them don't do that. We get a little bit different once we get a little bit more north of us, but this is for southern Wisconsin. When we get central Wisconsin and northern Wisconsin, they can go a little bit deeper into the summer just because of the weather. It tends to be a little colder up there, and starts getting hotter later. So they can still survive, but it's just especially with the nature of an eagle nest, they want it open so they can see around, and it basically bakes the
Oh, yeah.
eaglets when you get
Well,
later and later. Yeah.
and this is something that people think, oh, these poor birds in the dead of winter, they're suffering, they're so cold. And no, they have down. I mean, they have the original down jackets and they know how to puff themselves up with air to insulate themselves to stay warmer. And what you were just talking about too in the nest, that you see the eagle covered in snow and, the head is barely sticking out, that snow is actually a nice insulator.
Yeah.
So that bird is, I think, way more comfortable in that weather than they are in on an 80-degree sunny day with no canopy overhead. I- I've had chickens for, I don't know, over 15 years now, and my chickens are fine in the winter. They hate a hot day. I mean, there's nothing worse than seeing eaglets in the nest panting and being chased by biting flies. So that would be the least desirable thing, of the entire nesting season is just prior to fledging when it's just too hot and the insects are annoying and, there's a lot going on with trying to build up your ability to get out there and flap for the first time and take off.
Yeah.
So
And another point is that they're getting all, there's not like a water bowl in the nest. Okay. It's not like your, your dogs or cats or whatever. So they're getting all their liquids from the food, like the fish and other prey items that are coming in from, the adults bringing in food. So they can easily get dehydrated
Yeah,
very quickly in those circumstances once we get into the really the dog days of summer and the hot weather. It's just not good. And that's where you see if you're familiar with kind of the nesting seasons of bald eagles down in our friends down in Florida, they start real early. They start, I think, in November, I believe. Is that right, Beth? I think,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah,
So what on that end, they want to get the fledglings out of the nest before it gets real hot down there. They want to also get out there, and just because of their seasons, they again want to get the eaglets fledged before it gets really hot down in Florida or down south. So they're not getting baked as well. So it's kind of a similar. They change their breeding season timing just to make sure that they're out of the nest, so they can get around, get water and get into shade and areas that they can survive rather than getting baked in a big nest, a
yeah,
big smelly nest too. By that time, it's just
yeah.
the odor's not great. So
And if you didn't know, eagles do pant.
yes,
They
yeah.
they don't sweat like we do. They pant when they're
Yeah. And
overheated.
you can clearly see that when we're watching a
Yeah.
nest, especially late in the season when we're kind of on eggshells waiting for them to fledge. A lot of times you see those eaglets really panting, and when it's starting to get warm, it's like, come on, guys, get out of that nest. Get into the shade or get out into, flying around where it's definitely cooler for them and they can get down to water sources and all that. So that's really a key point is that March 15th deadline. As I said, it can happen. We've seen it a few times, but most of them, it's not a great recipe to lay that early or that late, getting into the dog days of summer where your percentages of a successful season is going to go way down. So
Hey Drew, I'm gonna throw you a curveball here.
okay.
Did you want to say anything about the uh, article that one of our watchers sent to me that I sent to you about Wisconsin being the number one?
Yeah,
Uh,
that was an interesting one. I don't know if it's AI or where that came from. I don't know
it
there
has to
was
be. I didn't even
there's
think
no
about that.
backing, but we saw an article that said that Wisconsin, which is one of the larger populations in the country, but nowhere near what Alaska has, and I don't think we're not even close to Minnesota at this point, I don't
No,
think. But it was saying that,
it's I think 30,000 is
yeah,
Alaska, 9,000 is Minnesota, and we're at 2,000
yeah.
being
So
bald eagles.
I don't know where this reporter got this information or how he wrote it, or if it was just a clickbait, maybe. But he was suggesting that Wisconsin was the number one, had the highest population of eagles. And he gave some legitimate points of why, Wisconsin's a great area for eagles, but it's just not based on reality. It was way off. So we got a good laugh about that. I think it's some of the stuff you read on the internet, I guess. It
Yeah.
was crap. Yeah.
So if you see it, just know Alaska's number one. There's no way we're ever going to be Alaska.
No, no. I
Um,
mean,
and
the just the landmass that
yeah,
Alaska has alone is gonna prevent that. So yeah. Yeah.
I'm
Crazy
going with U.S.
story.
Fish and Wildlife on this one,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
we are not number one.
No, we are not. We're up there, but we're not there. So and Washington, where I am, is I think it's sixth or seventh, I believe, in the country. So it's got a good population, but not anywhere near what this guy was suggesting and that Wisconsin was. So um And let's do a little update with avian influenza. I know we've talked about this pretty much every podcast, but it's very important, especially as we're going through the season to see how it ends up. We're fingers are crossed that this this is not a repeat of 2022. If you've
Yeah.
watched our other podcasts, it was a devastating season for eagles and a lot of other birds. But what was the update that we saw recently, Beth?
Well, I am going to read the title because I biology was not my best subject, and there is a paper that was done by the University of Minnesota, who really was tracking avian flu in an excellent way in 2022, and was sharing their information with everyone. And I even wrote to them asking them about what we were seeing as nest watchers here, which was we were losing the eaglets in the nest at anywhere from, like, it seemed to be around the 3 to 6 week age range, but our adults were fine. And so they wrote back and gave me some reasons why that could have been, and one of them was that they could have been exposed to highly pathogenic avian flu in previous seasons, because it is something that is always in the environment. It does not go away. And it's generally carried in the intestines of waterfowl, and like particular like the mallard. So what happened is University of Minnesota, along with a variety of other people, put out a paper saying exposure and survival of wild raptors during the 2022-2023 um, highly pathogenic influenza a virus outbreak. And what they concluded in this paper that they wrote was that they do detect that eagles do build a resistance, eagles in particular more than other raptors, to avian flu, so that if they've come across it, they've been exposed to it in the past, then when it's reintroduced to them, they stand a stronger chance of survival. And we certainly saw that because, when you're a 3 to 6 week old eaglet in the nest, you are not capable yet of feeding yourself. So your parent eagle, one of them has caught a waterfowl, brought it to the nest, and then it's going to pluck the feathers and it's going to shred that up into tiny little pieces to feed it to a small eaglet. So at the same time, it is ingesting and it has been exposed to avian flu by going through that process of feeding the eaglet. So um, the eaglets were dying and the adults were fine. So hopefully that gives us some hope for this season, because it is looking um, not good. Um, uh, we have had like 100 plus sandhill cranes die in Indiana, and Indiana, to their credit, are trying to remove the dead birds as quickly as they can so that raptors aren't feeding on them, and nor are fox and coyotes and other animals that could feed on it and possibly catch the avian flu and then continue to pass it on to other animals. So um, uh, there have been a few things found in the local area around us, and one of our watchers had a dead swan on their property. They were trying to get the DNR to pick it up, and I suggested they try their municipality to see if they can get them to remove the bird and discard it, so that you don't have eagles feeding on the carcass or any other animal. So that, in a season that is looking a bit bleak, that is at least hopeful news on the horizon that we may lose eaglets in the nest again. But we are not going to lose a lot of the adult population, fingers crossed. So,
Yeah, that was definitely positive information at least. But yeah, unfortunately, the nature of it when the eaglets are so young, it's going to be devastating on that fed. But as long as the adults are still around, it definitely helps for them to still to survive and have these territories. And similar to like the year after in 23, we had really a good solid breeding season that year after. So maybe it's going to be a situation where there's a couple of years that are good and then maybe one that's not so good. That might be the track record. But you know, fingers crossed the season is positive. We'll see. I think we'll have a better indication once migration starts. That's a big step, and that's where we saw a lot of the problems with eaglets dying and nests failing was around the times that you know a lot of the waterfall were migrating up into Wisconsin from other areas, and you know, bringing along those infections, those the bird flu with them, and causing issues with eagles and other raptors and other birds. So we'll see. It's kind of a you know, wait and see. Unfortunately, we can't do a whole lot, but that is a positive step that they are at least building up some immunity and some fighting back. And I know if that's you know, one of the best examples was one of the nests in Florida that failed, and they had tested the eaglets, and I think from what I've read, there has been people either observing or on the nest cam observing the eaglets or the eagles, the adults, acting a little bit like they're a little bit off. And then eventually it seemed to clear up. So most likely what was going on there is they had contracted the virus too. They obviously were ineffective if their eaglets had died from it. So they were getting exposure to the virus, and luckily they fought it off and were fine. So that's a great sign, and another indicator that this, you know, this reporting is valid. And you know, we'll see how the rest of the season goes.
University of Minnesota, I really value them.
Yeah,
They are a resource for great information. And then, you know, it tied into what we saw. We had a 65% failure rate in our nests that year with the Bald Eagle Nest Watch program. And usually we're between 10 and 18% or something like that. So, you know, with Mother Nature knocking a nest out of a tree, or, you know, getting a nest gets hit by lightning, you know, there's all sorts of things that can take out a nest. And then, so if you subtract that average of 15% out, that leaves 50% of our nests were taken out by avian flu. And of those nests, the adults were still around.
yeah,
So we did lose a couple of adults very early in the season, and I don't know if that they ever got to nesting, but we did see our adults surviving. So that's what had me reaching out, trying to understand more about
yeah.
um, avian flu, which there's a very definitive limit on what I can understand about it. But
Yeah, and that was one of the factors because that we tried to we added a whole new layer when those nests were failing, because typically when a nest fails, we told the volunteer, you know, you're done for the season. But we intentionally had our volunteers at least go out a time or two later, after the nest had failed, just to locate the adults. And as Beth was saying, we were seeing the adults in the area acting fine, acting healthy. So that was encouraging. And then I think that was really gave us the indication that, yeah, this is affecting the eaglets, because they, you know, they don't have that immune system built up. They don't have that exposure. They don't have the years. But the older adults, you know, the adults that have been on, you know, at least 4 or 5 years old, a lot of times older, they've been exposed and they have been able to fight. Their body has the ability to fight off the virus, which is definitely a positive.
and my next question is if the adults have it and they lay eggs. Does the chick in the egg have some of that
Yeah.
adult resistance? And that would be a nice thing to find out too.
Yeah, that's something we'll have to look into and see. Possibly, that's
Fingers crossed.
above my expertise, but
Yeah.
it is interesting to see this and get these studies, and these all relate to the domestic birds as well. So it's
Right.
important information to see if they can build up, in the chicken population. Is there a case where they could, I don't know, make build up some immunity to it as well, and we'll have to see. But again, that's something that I imagine people are already working on,
Yeah.
to help. Um,
Well, and I don't want to lead anybody on that I read that paper and I understood it, because
yeah,
I just went with the synopsis on it, which
yeah,
was
yeah,
I went to the last paragraph to see,
yeah,
pretty much which which Drew and I were both very excited to see that it matched what we
yeah,
were seeing, because we got hit for a whammy on that as well. The fact that that season was so devastating, we had no idea that was coming. We knew it was bad for Raptors, but how exactly it was going to play out, at least it matches up to the paper.
yeah. All right, so let's end the podcast when we try to do it on a more positive note, and I'm gonna
Well, that was positive.
yeah, positivity is definitely great. So I'm gonna share. Beth, I'll start with this one. And let's see here.
Just in case you're wondering out there, that is not a bald eagle.
Yeah. But a lot of us are birders. Let me go. Is it
Yep, that
that's
looks better.
okay, that's better. All right. See if
So that is a great gray owl, and my husband, who does the bald eagle nest watch with me, we heard an eruption was happening. We have been up to northern Minnesota to try to see these guys before, and have failed to see them. And so I was pretty much done. But then when we heard there was an eruption, we tried to finagle our schedules so that we could get up and take advantage of seeing these guys during the eruption. And so this is a great landing on, obviously, barbed wire fence, and not your beautiful nature photo that you want to see of it in a tree, but I just thought it was interesting if you could possibly see in there. This is cropped, because I was not this close to that owl, but it looks like its talons are a perfect match for the barbed wire. So you have barbed wire landing on barbed wire, but also what you can see is the photo is a little foreshortened, but just how huge its head is and how long its legs are, and then where is the body? I mean, there is just not a lot of body to that bird. They're about 2 pounds, even though they're our longest or tallest owl that we have. They are longer than a great horned owl, but a great horned owl outweighs them by quite a bit. So I just like that picture for its, um, you know, barbs meeting barbs, and it had no problem landing on that either.
yeah, yeah. No, they're such beautiful birds, and it's fun to see your pictures. One day I hope to get up a little farther north and see them, because it's they're just cool looking birds.
Well, I've learned eruption years are, best to wait for that, and the idea is it's about every 5 years
Yeah.
that there's an eruption. But also there were boreal owls there, which are very tiny. They're sort of like the size of a screech owl, maybe just a little bit bigger. And we saw a couple of those as well. So barred owls and saw-whet owls, it was sort of a bit of a mecca up there. And what they were saying is what happens is the birds start flying south to because the vole population where they are is not good that year. that they come south into the US, and that's what brings snowy owls in as well. But they hit Lake Superior and they tend to not want to go across it. So they either have to make their way around it or they kind of stay in that general vicinity. I don't know how true that is or not, but it seemed a reasonable um, idea that that's why there were so many up in that area.
So they're catching, basically field mice or voles or in that
Yeah.
area. And they're, if I remember correctly, and correct me if I'm wrong, they're very active during the day, similar to snowies.
Yeah. They're crepuscular is the term for it. They have usually owls that have lighter colored eyes, which these guys definitely do. They have yellowy, golden eyes, are more dusk and dawn hunters, but can really hunt anytime, um, uh, depending. Barred owls, which are one of our native species here in the US, they have brown eyes, so they're more nocturnal than dusk dawn. So this photo also shows you um, just how short their bodies are and how seemingly huge their heads are. Drew and I were joking earlier that to see one of these wet would really probably be very shocking, um, and mess with your whole concept of a fierce owl, but those talons are nothing to mess with. But while we were there, there were three owls hunting in this general area that was not huge. You could generally see all three of them simultaneously hunting. And it seemed like tripods and human heads were their ideal hunting height for searching for um, food. And uh, I have a great deal of respect for talons, and I had waved off an owl that I felt was coming straight for my head. Um, I didn't know how excited I was to have one standing on my camera either, but it diverted and it went over to this woman, and she was pretty excited that the owl had landed there. And I was a little disturbed by how close we were to the owls. I kept backing up and I was on the fringe of the group, but the owls didn't have any problem coming near humans, and they kept flying at me, which gave me great photos. But they would fly just over my head and perch just behind me and continue to hunt. And as they were hunting, they were catching voles and they would bring them back to the camera tripod or the camera and consume it.
Yeah.
Um, so the thought was is that these were young birds, that they hadn't had much human interaction. Whereas at the bog, which is not too far from where I was at, those are year-round residents, and they do know who what people are, and for the most part keep their distance. So it made for one heck of a unique experience.
Yeah, yeah, definitely not shy birds. So, but it
No,
kind of brings up the discussion of you know, and I think this relates to eagles as well as etiquette around these
very
wild
much so.
birds. And you hear those horror stories of people like baiting them to get these, National Geographic type photos and stuff. And this is evident that you really don't even have to do that. Like you guys weren't trying, none of these photographers were trying to bring in these birds. They were just probably curious and thought you guys were large owls or other animals that they were like, what is this thing? So,
I thought most people were really respectful of the owls, and the barbed wire photo I showed you, that owl had flown up towards me, and I snapped that photo, um, and I started to step back, and I looked behind me, and all the photographers that were standing there, were moving back. So because you have large lenses, you don't need to be
yeah,
close to the animal. And there were a few photographers that I just wondered, what are you doing? Because I didn't even really want to be in the grass because we're sort of on their dinner plate,
Yeah,
and if they're hearing our feet crunching, and it was so cold, so that audible sound of shoes crunching on snow and our breathing and our heartbeats and all that stuff, owls can pick up on, and makes it difficult for them to hunt. And
yeah.
when it's that cold out, you want to see them be successful.
Yeah, you want to, and you see that with snowies as well as you don't want to disturb them, and eagles and other birds as well. These birds need those. They need to hunt. They need to get those calories, especially when it's that cold out. They need to to refuel. And if we're disturbing them there where they can't properly hunt or can't properly nest or whatever, it's a hindrance to them. And you do see some of them unfortunately die. I know there was a case in Wisconsin, not too far from where I used to live. And unfortunately that happens. And there wasn't a clear indication. I don't think in that case it was caused by the disturbances or the photographers, but there have been some cases where unfortunately they perish because people are just not giving him, or just 20, it seems like it's
Space.
24/7, and they're not giving them the space, or they're not they're constantly there. So, we all, especially as birders, it's exciting. It definitely is to photograph and be in the presence of these birds that you don't typically see that often. But we just got to take a moment to say, hey, am I too close? Should I take a step back? And that's what we really stress with our volunteers with the Eagles as well. Because you don't want to be that person that causes issues. At least I think most people do. There's probably some cases of people that don't really care. They just want to get that great photo or whatever. But I think the vast majority of people don't want to disturb these creatures.
And then I started laughing because I'm thinking, yeah, she is way too close to that owl.
Yeah, yeah,
But again, the owl flew to her stand.
yeah,
So, most people then, would it started backing up and brought out their cell phone to take a picture of,
yeah,
how close the owl was to them. I would have, I did talk to a couple people, and that's always awkward about, you know, just crowding. If you're flushing the bird, if the bird is flying off, then you are definitely too close. Um, but those things never go well. Uh, but it was good to see them eating. So that was the one thing that made me feel a little bit relieved because, these guys had been there for weeks and nothing has deterred them from hunting in that space.
yeah,
And then you just wonder how many voles are under the
yeah,
ground as you go walking
yeah.
around. And it's like, because this is sustaining three, young owls.
Yeah, and they probably, what do they must eat. Any idea how many they're
I
grabbing a day?
I think I
At least a
heard
dozen, maybe?
five or six
Oh,
was
five,
the
six.
answer.
Okay.
But as we were driving up, we got the audiobook of What an Owl Knows by I think it's Jennifer Ackerman. I'm sorry if I mispronounced her name. But that was a fascinating book, and I think not clinical. It was a great book to listen to on the way, and it gave some statistics on what uh, birds need to eat in a given day to sustain themselves. Like, we know eagles can go a couple days without eating.
Yeah,
I don't know how true that is for an owl. But it talked about different owl species and behaviors and things that they've learned about them. And, like the saw-whet, that's a very tiny owl.
yeah,
Um, I can never remember what's smaller. Pygmy and maybe one other one is smaller than that, but they don't live here in Wisconsin.
yeah,
But they used to think saw-whets were really rare, and then they started doing studies on them, and they're like, man, there's saw-whets everywhere. So um, it is owls are not entirely well understood, but I thought her book was really excellent.
yeah. Yeah, and I'll link I'll link her book, a description in the show notes so that if people are interested in looking at that book, we'll have that information there. Yeah, they're just owls are so interesting and similar to eagles. So
A
I
lot of
feel
different
yeah,
behavior ranges between all
yeah,
the owl species. I mean, they aren't, you think of them as being nocturnal and sticking close to a tree trunk and being very secretive. And then some of them are, like short-eared owls are
yeah,
just out there, like, don't care about humans. And so it's just very different seeing how
yeah.
they all behave differently.
Yeah, yeah, they're very, very interesting type of bird for sure. And yeah, thank you so much, Beth, for sharing that with that. And so you were up in northern Minnesota, correct? Up in that area.
Yeah, we
Yeah.
went along the northern shore of Lake Superior
Okay.
and, got sort of close to the Canadian border. And, our main objective was to see great grays, and we were lucky enough to see them, several of them, and the boreal owl, which was also in an eruption year. And then we did hikes at state parks and stuff
Yeah.
like that at minus 30 degrees because,
Yeah.
that's who we are.
Yeah. It gets quite cold up there. So yeah,
It
for
was
sure.
it was brutal,
Yeah.
brutal, but beautiful sunrises on Lake Superior
Oh
at
yeah, I bet. Yeah. Yeah.
various places along
And it
there.
looks like you got pretty clear sunny days, which is
It
probably
was
helped a little
beautiful.
bit. Yeah.
Yeah, we had only had one little snowy day. We were only up there for 2 full days, but I kept thinking that this owl was looking at this woman's parka, wondering, is that live or is that not that
Yeah.
fur cover on her hat? But I like to speculate that, but I'm sure the owl knew better. But
Yeah. Yeah.
could have made her hat really attractive.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great shot. Great shot. So, all right, I think we'll end there. Again, thanks for listening, and of course, as my kids like to say, smash the like button and please subscribe to our YouTube channel. And as always, if you have any questions, we'd love to answer them. So we are Nesting Eagles Podcast at gmail.com. And send around your questions. We're also on Facebook, and we're slowly building up our socials. So look for those. And if you have any questions, we also love to see people's photos of eagles. Or if, we'd love to hear about trips like the one that Beth took. It doesn't necessarily have to be eagles, but other interesting birds or whatnot. Let us know about it, and we can highlight your photos or whatever, and love to hear back from you on that. So with that,
Just respect the bird. That's
yeah,
all we
yeah,
ask. Respect the bird.
that's the big thing, and hopefully people are doing that, and we can coexist. It's not, especially with the technology there is with cameras, you don't need to get that close, to be honest. And that's something that's is kind of a key point with me. It's just especially when we're viewing the eagles with spotting scopes or long range cameras, you just don't have to get that close to them and bother them. Let them do their thing, and you can still get great photos and videos or whatever, get good data. So it's doable, especially with the technology that we have now. All right. Well, thank you again, and we should be you'll be hearing from us soon. And as I said, reach out to us, let us know if you have any cool stories or any questions. We're here. All right. Thank you.